We are against the legalization of prostitution because there are many reasons I don't think it's what we need in society. So first off, it's really dangerous and kind of a violent path to take just to make money. You can get beaten up or even murdered. Like, it's not a safe path to pursue. It's very risky business that could cost you even your life in some cases. Prostitutes experience many forms of violence, such as like physical, verbal, mental abuse from like pimps, brothels, and even traffickers. There's also a very large chance of sexual assault while being a prostitute, since prostitutes are just seen as an object. People will just treat them as such. They won't get treated like a human being with rights in some cases. The people who buy prostitutes just see them as an object they've purchased, and they can do whatever they want. There are many studies that show that prostitutes are at a way bigger risk of rape, which definitely isn't okay, and it's very sad, and it's just it's sad because it's a normal thing that happens when you're involved in prostitution.
There's also a large risk of like the STDs and the just health factors that go into this too, because they can use condoms and stuff, but let's be real, a lot of people, they're not going to want to, so they'll try to talk them out of it, and that's really dangerous for both men and women, because there's like risks of getting pregnant, and then the diseases, and if they see multiple people, then it's spreading multiple things, and you can just spread it like indirectly and directly, so there's also human trafficking. The human trafficking is a big problem because I lost my spot. Yeah, the human trafficking, many women and children, they're forced into this, and it's slavery, and so they're often being traded for like drugs and stuff.
So Gerda Lerner, PhD, states that the act of prostitution dates back to as early as 2400 BC. We believe that the legalization of prostitution could be all parts profitable and safe and empowering for women. The legalization of prostitution would allow for regulation of sex workers, and this would open gateway that would allow us to ensure the medical and physical safety of women in the trade. We would like to argue that prostitution is a victimless crime. However, the act of prosecuting for this victimless crime costs us millions of dollars each year. Legalization could protect children from illegal sex trade, and we have seen the success of legalization in places like Nevada. Prostitution is not going anywhere, and if we have the desire to be a forward-moving culture, we need to allow women the autonomy to choose their own employment and allow them to have a choice over their bodies.
Basically, where was I going? Yeah, I'm good with that. Sorry.
Okay.
4 minutes. Go.
Okay, so one of our first arguments is dangers and violence. So prostitution can be really harmful on many levels. It poses a threat to women's mental and physical health, and along with many other consequences. In Germany, there's a large federal study dated back to 2004 on the subject to violence, and among the total of 10,000 interviewed women, there were 110 prostitutes who made these statements, and 82% named forms of physical violence, and 92 experienced sexual harassment, and 87 experienced physical violence. So there's lots of violence in this, and that's definitely not okay. And they experience violence from like their pimps, brothel owners, traffickers, and they can even get murdered from this. And they experience so much violence in this just for trying to make money, and I really don't think that's okay. Like in Amsterdam, they've become like the first municipality in the Netherlands to introduce these laws in an attempt to tackle abuse in the industry and also to strengthen the position of the sex workers. But a lot of these laws, like, they're not really working because it's just not working. And they're hoping to like raise the legal age, because usually it's 18, but they're trying to raise it to 21 just to like minimize some of the violence that might be happening. And
Okay. So our second argument is the risk of STD and AIDS. So even if a prostitute is being tested every week for HIV, they will test negative for at least 4 to 6 weeks, and possibly the first 12 weeks after being infected. So that's kind of a big issue. Yeah, if you don't use a condom, then the prostitute will get paid more, which that's really bad because, you know. In Amsterdam, the use of condoms is not obligated by law, according to the AmsterdamAdvisory.com. Yeah, so, sorry, I'm done.
Then one of our third arguments is that there's a big chance of sexual assault and rape, and that's a really bad thing in this industry, sort of. So, the connection between rape and prostitution is that like women are turned into objects just for sexual use, and they can either be bought or it can be stolen. So, there's a study in Germany dated by 2001 with 54 prostitutes, and it found out that all the women had experienced trauma, and 70% had been physically attacked, and 68% had been raped, and this is by the Trauma and Prostitution.eu, and the violence is pretty normal in prostitution. Like, there's so many kinds of violence, and just sexual assault, and there's a research by the British Medical Journal that found in 3 cities in the UK, half of the women in outdoor prostitution and a quarter of the women in indoor prostitution have been subject to violence by a sex buyer in the previous 6 months. That's pretty bad.
Okay. And then the fourth argument is human trafficking. So the UN says 80% of the Nigerian women who came to Italy by boat in the first half of 2016, they'll be trafficked into prostitution. And then like over 80% of 2,515 suspected incidences of human trafficking investigated by law enforcement agencies between January 2008 and June 2010 involved adult prostitution or exploitation and forced prostitution of children. Ew, children, that's nasty. Also, 48% of the investigated incidents involved adults, while 40% uncovered the exploitation or forced prostitution of children. The remainder, about 350 cases, involved. Yeah.
Okay, back to you guys.
You guys mentioned physical violence towards the sex workers. I believe that if they are getting assaulted or having any things that shouldn't be done to them, they should have help available, which making it legal will make help more readily available to them. They can go to the police if somebody is beating them up or if somebody's done something wrong to them. It'll make the people attracted to that business a little bit less likely to do bad things. It's not a bad industry, it's the people that it attracts at the moment.
Yeah, and there's a brothel in Nevada that just made a quote that said brothels want to keep their licenses, so they typically keep in close contact with police to keep things safe and legal. Which means that women in prostitution, they're currently working for an illegal field. So when these terrible things like assault and rape are happening to them, they don't have any legal action to take, because you go into the police station and say, I'm working as a prostitute and this happened to me, you're gonna get caught for prostitution. They're not gonna care about these things that are happening to you. You also mentioned like STDs and AIDS, where if we were to legalize prostitution, legalizing prostitution actually pushes women to move their prostitution from the streets into brothels, which is kind of like a yucky word. People don't really like that word. But brothels are able to make regulations that require the use of condoms, which will hugely lower the risk of STDs. I read a quote, so April 2012, a study by the Urban Justice Center found that New York cops were using condoms found as women as evidence against them in prostitution cases. So that means that women were not carrying condoms because it was a way for police to make the call of whether or not they were prostitutes. Legalization of prostitution would allow women to have a freedom to be able to not only carry these, but it would also have a regulation for them to be encouraged to use them. And if they're working in a brothel where it's required, it gives them kind of something to lean back on when someone's pushing against them for use.
So the average age for a child entering prostitution is 13 years old, according to the Department of Justice. So legalizing it will set kind of standards on that, where if you do have the legal age being 18 or 21, regardless, it will ensure that there are less children being trafficked into this industry, and yeah, less children is better in that kind of industry, I feel.
Also, the country would save just a ridiculous amount of money if we were to legalize prostitution. CNBC did a study that the average Nevada sex worker makes about $3,000 a week, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's like $12,000 a month. And we would be able to tax that if it was legalized. And then on top of that, study published by the University of California, Hastings Law Journal, found that law enforcement agencies in America spend about $2,000 per person that they arrest for prostitution. That's about $120 million a year that we are spending on law enforcement for arresting people for prostitution.
Okay, good points. 1 minute for for your prep, and then we'll get into the open debate.
Yeah, I've got
Because you get the whole thing.
Sorry, I'm not trying to.
Okay.
5 minutes, ready to go.
Okay, so just to start off, right now in Canada, the prostitutes can sell sex, but buying is illegal. So, and I've read lots of places that the laws here in Canada are actually kind of confusing. So why don't we just make it like illegal? This way, there's no real
Well,
harm.
why don't we just make it legal, and then ways there's no confusion? It's both ways.
And also, for like the STDs and stuff, there was a study in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it said that only 50% of prostitutions who were prostituted for at least 6 months had an STD, not including the HIV or AIDS. But the study also showed an alarming incident of positive Pap tests. They're at a higher risk of cancer, like cervical cancer. They could also spread They could also spread human papillor. Yeah, I don't know how to say that. HPV, directly or indirectly.
And that's the nice thing about legalization is, like I said, it would encourage the use of condoms. It would encourage the use of condom use, and it would empower women to be able to have more control over their sexual safety.
It gives us the opportunity to kind of like regulate what brothels are doing. We can tell them they have to have safe sex implementations, and they can get fined or shut down otherwise.
Also, because like, if you did have a brothel, sorry, my words today, people could still try to bribe them to like not use condoms, so that's really dangerous too.
It's like, I don't really think, like, we don't know what's gonna happen behind the doors, you know, like, because like we're not really there, so we don't get to see what happens.
I wouldn't want to see that.
The thing that you have to recognize, though, is that that's the same thing with any business, right? Like that happens. That can happen with lawyers. That can happen with public health care. Like those opportunities for those type of things are open in any job industry, and it's going to be their responsibility to decide whether or not that's a route that they want to take. And that comes back to the autonomy of women. Do we want to let women have a say over their own bodies, over their own choices, over their own decision of employment.
Prostitution, it could be seen as like immoral, because it undermines the value of real relationships. And also like, it could be bad for their health, like it could put real stress on them, so they could often turn to like drugs and stuff to like help cope with their issues. And also, there's still the possibility of like human trafficking, because like just because like it's legal doesn't mean that it won't happen illegally still.
But I think that legalization would lower the trafficking, don't you agree? And if it's going to lower the trafficking, I think that's better than just letting it stay the same.
Also, you have to be like careful with like the assault and the stuff,
It's a dangerous business. so-
because like just because they're keeping it safe doesn't mean that someone's still gonna try and like rape them, because there are sick people out there.
However, it's the same thing that I just said. If we can lower those cases, why wouldn't we?
And also there's more of a chance for those people to get caught if you're in a brothel, if you're in a regulated area.
They have that option to be able to entrust law enforcement.
Trafficking is the second largest enterprise of organized crime behind the drug cartels.
The $32 billion industry, and why shouldn't we
You tax it.
capitalize on that?
Prostitution isn't going away anytime soon. There's always going to be people willing to pay for sex. So there's going to be a demand, and there's always going to be people who are willing to use their bodies for work in the same way that we all do. So there's always going to be a supply. We're never going to be able to completely eradicate prostitution, so why wouldn't we be capitalizing on the benefits that it can have in our country?
Right now, okay, so in 2012, World Development did a study about the effect of legalized prostitution on human trafficking inflows into high-income countries. They found that countries with legalized prostitution had more human trafficking inflows than the countries that did not legalize it.
A study by the New Zealand Ministry of Justice 5 years after they legalized prostitution in brothels found no incidents of trafficking, and sex worker advocates say the law has made it easier for sex workers to report abuse and for law enforcement to make arrests.
All right, great open debate. Minutes, prep before your closing statements. Excellent. Excellent.
I was like, oh no.
Probably make even more money. I mean, it's more people going across the street. So it's a nice clean brothel.
Oh, we have to start first? Oh, okay, cool.
It's coming soon.
And I mean, you're all for like, hey man, it's my body, right? I can do what I want. So, it's like that.
If it adds to my tax dollars, well, I'm not for tax.
Okay, so like, it's kind of.
You can't do that.
Okay, closing statements when you guys are ready.
Okay, even after everything you said, I still believe that it should still be illegal because there's just so many reasons that it should be. Mostly because it's just really dangerous and violent, and that like just to make money, I don't know if you should exploit yourself like that, just because it's so dangerous and it's just like physically, mentally, there's just so many things that could go wrong, and like the sexual assault in it, like even though you are like working in like a sex environment and everything, like there's still a chance of assault in that way, and then just because like they're not seen as people, they're just seen as like objects that are just that you can sell and buy, and they're not really seen as like a human with rights again, and yeah.
And like also like 40 to 85% of all prostitutes are drug users. That's according to alcoholrehab.com. So like the stress that it has on them is like, it's really bad. Also, like you do have to be careful with like the risk of like, you know, human trafficking and like all the health factors.
But yeah, we still just believe that it should be illegal just because there are so many things that are wrong with that whole industry.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay. It's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as sex is a thing, people are gonna pay for it. Regardless of if it's legal or not, it's gonna happen. Might as well capitalize on it. It's a $32 billion industry. And yeah, it will alleviate strain on the justice system through people imprisoned or in courts and whatnot. It costs taxpayers nearly $200 million in court and jail fees, according to findingjustice.org. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, we just believe that it should be legalized because we might not be able to eradicate all violence, but we can definitely lower it, as well as we can lower the amount of women who are contracting things like STDs and AIDS, and we can allow women to have autonomy over their bodies and over their choice of employment. And by empowering them to do that, we're empowering their health, we're empowering their lifestyles, and we're just giving them overall choice.
It's not about eradication, it's about minimizing the damage done by the industry.